see what you got. That runs like shit. Hey everybody, welcome back. My name's Tom, Moto-Resto LLC, Bradenton, Florida. And what we do on this channel, of course, as you probably know if you have watched some of my videos, and if you haven't, if this is your first time, welcome and thanks for tuning in to everybody, is we fix old bikes primarily. This is an 84 Kawasaki GPz750, and she's not running right, but we can take care of that. So let's get right on it. I think the first thing we're going to do is do a little walk around, and I'll show you a couple things regarding it because this is my first rodeo with this particular bike, but I'll explain here in a minute. Alright, what the hell? Probably should turn the air on. Okay, so again, it's an 84 GPz750. Now, this was owned by a gentleman who I knew and still know from way back in the day, who runs a dual sport organization, a fairly large one, down here in the south. And while I used to do dual sporting, I retired from that because, number one, I suck at it, and number two, I kept getting hurt as a result of number one. So, I still knew the guy, and in 2020, he contacted me about this because it wasn't running right, and he lived up Newport Richey, Florida, or something like that, and brought it down, and I got it straightened out for him. I did some electrical on it. I did some other things as well. So fast forward to, I don't know, maybe 8-10 months ago, the Z1R customer, he texted me, that's better, and said, I got a GPz750, I just bought one, and guess where I got it from? And I texted him back with the name of that, my original customer, and he said, yeah, so he bought this from my original customer. So that's why I mentioned that, you know, it isn't my first rodeo with this. I think I said that, but that's what I'm saying now. So I'm familiar with this bike. This is what we have to do first. We got to get it running right, and as you saw from that opening clip, she'll fire up on the enricher, which is right here, but as soon as you take it off, it just drops on its face and dies. And that's clearly junk in the carb. Slow circuits are probably all plugged up because it's been sitting for a while. So the objectives here, as far as the fuel system goes, the customer just wants a kind of a stage 1 setup. We're going to retain the factory air box and put a K&N filter in there. And it's a K&N jetting kit as well. Carburetor's got to come apart anyway, come off the bike, and we'll clean them. But we'll just put the jets in. I'm going to take a look at them first and make sure they look right. We'll double check on the fuel cock and make sure that's flowing properly. And we'll do some other stuff. There's some other doodad little things he wants me to do in regards to cleaning up some things, like with this anti-dive. These things are stupid anyway. This anti-dive setup has been leaking and corroding or eating all the paint off of there. So we're going to take care of that and a couple other things. But the main thing for this video is going to be the fuel system. All right, I'm not going to get into the other little stuff with you because you don't need to see that. It's kind of boring. But this part, I think you'll get something out of. So now that I've gone over it, I will say, well, one more thing. I will say this was not green when I saw it. It came as a red version, and that's probably what you GPz aficionados out there are saying, going, wait a minute, it's an 84, why is it green? Well, he bought a second set of bodywork for it and tank. He's got the original ones at home, which were in nice shape. And he had these painted up as you see it. I kind of like it. I think it looks great, that Kawasaki green. But I just wanted to mention that, yes, the original bodywork and tank are in his possession. They're still in good shape. He's got them stored away. So if he wanted to sell it and go back to an original setup, if you will, for for a GPz, then he could do that. So, all right, let me get you in the stand, and we'll start taking this thing apart. And I'm going to talk about a few things as we go that I did last time on it, and then we'll move forward as we go and pull the carbs and so forth. How does this come apart? Just kidding. Here's the jet kit. It doesn't look like one of those little pizza boxes that you get used to get from like Pizza Hut or something like that. Little pizza box, pizza. Now, when you're taking off these side covers, there's usually at least 1 or 2 screws. There's 2 in this case, but there's going to be some sort of a locking tab. See, this is the spot that it locks in up here. Some of them go in where this goes up and thusly comes down, so don't be pulling out on it. If you go to take this apart, you'll break that. It looks like, has this one been repaired? No, this one looks original, which is nice. So, yeah, some other bikes just have a another doodad, like with a pointy gizmo, a pointy bit that goes into a grommet, kind of like the tip of a bullet, but shaped back, and then it pops in. This one, again, has something, so when it goes back in, it's going to go up into this little area where the rubber is, and then get put back in. When I put these back together, I also put some silicone grease on them. It just makes them easier to take, to put back on and then take off again in the future. So right now we're going to go ahead and lose this, because, not lose it, but lose it from the tank, because we don't want to lose it. So just a point I wanted to segue or digress to, just to let you know that it's really easy to break that. So if you're taking one of these apart, any bike, and it's hanging up in one particular spot, pull it back a little bit and look in there, or look in there with a flashlight, and you kind of can see how it goes, and that'll tell you what the direction to go in is. Also, you can look at the parts fiche, or certainly the service manual for that. I think if I do a parts order to my OEM supplier, because I know these carb kits that I used last time were aftermarket from Z1 Enterprises, but if I do an original order, I think I'm going to try to order them up some new screws, because I don't know if you can see that. These are pretty gnarled up. And no, I didn't do that. They were like that. I can't remember if they were in the last time that I had it in 2020, but hell, I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, so how am I going to remember that? Some of them you slide forward or backwards too to get a little bit more clearance in here, but these really don't have any clearance. They're all the same, but I just wanted to mention sometimes they're very tight. Of course, this rubber is a piece of shit as well, so yeah, it's kind of hanging up on it, but it'll work. As long as we didn't break it, we're good. I think before we go too far, I'm going to go ahead and drain the fuel out of one of the carbs, maybe all of them. Take a look at it from the float bowl. Now, they have to come off anyway, so it's not really a big deal, but I want to kind of see if there's any water in there. If there's water in the fuel from it sitting for so long, that's why it won't run right now. And we might be able to actually get it to run pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and drain it out. See how it smells, see how it tastes. Not that good. Yeah, well, here's the problem. Alright? That's fuel is bad. Smells a little varnishy. Yeah, it's no good. So the reason why it runs like shit right now is a combination of 2 things. It's probably got gunked up slow jets and maybe some other passages, but the fuel's no good. So we're going to do, and like I said, if I was just doing this as a quick repair, I'd probably just drain the fuel out of the tank, run it off the auxiliary fuel can, which we'll ultimately do anyway when we prove this out. But then to get it running, it'll probably run just fine. But he wants to jet it up, so we're going to be pulling them nonetheless, which is a real pain in the ass with these OEM air boxes, but not impossible. In fact, I think I remember a trick that I used to get it back in, maybe even get them out. I don't remember. But we'll show you that here in a bit. But yeah, this fuel's no good. I'm not even going to bother with the other 4. Yeah, 4? I'm not going to bother with the other 3 until we get... When I get some more stuff out of the way, I will drain those out, because I don't want them spilling all over the motor as I manipulate them to, get these out, like that. But right now, I'm not going to worry about it. This was just a test. This is a test of the emergency crappy fuel system. All right, on these GPZs, the baterias here, this little guy is actually a electrolyte sensor. They don't have a low charge or a voltage regulator or a actual voltage sense warning indicator on this bike as far as charging or not charging. They have this essentially to tell you that the battery acid, the electrolyte, is low, and that takes a special how do you pronounce that, Wyosa battery, which this doesn't have. I put one in when I originally did it for my original customer, because no other battery will fit these. I don't know if it's any other years of the GPZ, but for the 84, this got a build date of 11 of 83. The bottom of the battery box has got a bevel in it, at the very bottom, maybe about quarter to 3/8 of an inch, wide bevel or length bevel, however you want to look at it. And it will not let a AGM or other type of battery sit down low enough. So essentially this hold down, which also is your tank capture on the rear, must be a joke there. This is pushing down too hard on the battery. I can tell you right now, it's like squishing it. That's why you can see that this battery terminal on the positive side is kind of, it looks like me after a big meal trying to get into my skinny pants. So basically, that's no good. So we're going to replace that. I'm going to order one online and bring it in. Probably bring it over to Batteries Plus and have them charge it with electrolyte, because I don't have any more battery acid. That was years ago, and I scrapped mine. It got too old, because they won't ship you a battery that has got acid in it. So that's what we'll do. So I'll get that order later on today. But for now, let's go ahead and continue to get this taken apart. I just kind of wanted to show you that and the reason why that's not in there. See how much that's pushing up on it? Yeah. I spent a considerable amount of time a couple of years ago trying to get a workaround for this, because I really wanted to put an AGM battery in here. It just wasn't going to happen. There ain't one. And now the weight of the tank's down on it, because this is just bolted to keep it from moving side to side, end to end, or up and down. So actually, I'm going to do this off camera. I'm going to jack the back of the tank off and then get the fuel line off and drain the fuel out of it, because I can't handle these big heavy fuel tanks full of fuel anymore. My back is just not going to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and get it drained, and then we'll pull the tank off. I'll show you that part. Okay, one thing I wanted to show you before I do that, I do have the fuel line unhooked from the fuel cock. This fuel cock does have a vacuum actuated component to it, or feature. And I've explained those before. I'll go into that a little bit more in depth later on, just as a refresher. But with vacuum actuated fuel cocks, the only thing that holds this fuel back from bypassing this, even in the off position, is a diaphragm and a little tiny spring. And the diaphragm's got a little like tit on it that closes off that port. So when the engine starts, it pulls vacuum on that diaphragm, opens it up, and will allow fuel to flow when it's in the on or reserve position. And I'll go into more detail about that later. So the first thing you want to do is, when you disconnect your fuel line, stop and watch. And in the off position, you shouldn't have any dripping. Now you have a little bit of residue, that's fine, or residual fuel, but you should not have any dripping, because dripping indicates that it's bypassing. And a bypassing fuel cock in inline 4 like this is a bad thing. I don't know if these carbs have overflows in them. And if they don't, you can actually fill up the engine, or at least one of the cylinders, with fuel and hydrolock it. And what that causes is a bent connecting rod, which this one doesn't sound like that. So, and plus it's not bypassing. So it's not drip, drip, drip. It's not continuous drip. So we're good there. All right. So I just wanted to point that out. Whenever you have a vacuum, well, actually any fuel cock, but especially when you have one of these, I hate these vacuum actuated fuel cocks, you definitely want to check as soon as you disconnect the fuel line whether or not it's bypassing. Drip, 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 drip. And if it is, then you better check these carbs very thoroughly. If at that point you might want to pull the plugs out and crank the motor, and if any fuel squirts out, then you might have a problem. But in this case, we're not going to worry about that. While this is draining, I'll show you another thing about this fuel cock. You see you have on, reserve. So on is like regular, and then reserve. And down here with the setting I have it on, because it goes this way, let me move it over a little bit and show you. You see it says PRI. Now that stands for prime. These vacuum operated fuel cocks, as I said before, only open when the engine's cranking. So if you had empty fuel in the carbs, like in other words you had drained the float bowls for storage, or doing some work on it and the float bowls are empty, you can fill the carbs with fuel on prime so it'll start quicker. Otherwise you're going to be cranking and cranking and cranking and cranking it, because the vacuum is going to open that fuel cock up only when the engine is being cranked, and it gets an intake pulse on this diaphragm, and then it just cranks forever, so before it's going to go. So again, the PRI is for prime. You never want to leave that on prime on any of these carbureted bikes that have this type of a set up on the fuel cock. Never, ever, ever. Always turn them. In this case, there really isn't an off, so to speak. There's the on position. So we would turn it to the on position. And if you notice, when you turn it to the on position and properly functioning fuel cock no longer flows fuel, because we're not pulling any vacuum on that diaphragm. All right, so essentially the on is the off position, for lack of a better description. Also, the same thing would be the case on reserve. When we turn it on reserve, it doesn't flow anymore as well. So when you're checking out one of these fuel cocks, check both positions, because sometimes in the on position or the reserve position, maybe a little different. You might have an external leak in one setting and bypassing in another. I mean, these things can get pretty funky. So we'll put it back on prime and let it drain. So again, PRI is prime. Still draining. All right, about time. GPZ with this display on top of the tank has a connector. It's a 9-pin. I know that because I fixed this one the last time it was here in 2020. Some other shop had cut the wires and just tied them together. Connector should be right here, which you can't see, of course. Pretty sure that's it, or could be this one. I thought there was enough slack to pull it out. Yeah, there it is. That's got to be it right there. Pretty sure I left enough. But it wraps around the only way to get in here, it wraps around that rubber bumper in there. So we may have to slide the tank back a little bit first, carefully, not doing any damage to anything. And so there's a connector. I know I can't show you because I don't have another hand, but we'll just disconnect this connector now if we can. There we go. And I got the vacuum line disconnected. There is a drain underneath here. I'll show you this in a minute when I get it off. Sort of a drain. It's a drain for the kind of an overflow catch for the what do you call it? There's I'll show you the bottom of the tank here in a second, but I just popped it off because the thing just comes off really easy. In fact, I remember on this one it barely held down. I'm going to see if I can do some mods on this to make it better. But where that goes on the bottom of the tank is toward this side, or the right side of it, if you will. And it's underneath, of course. We'll just turn this gently up on the side. I have it on a towel here. You can see that there's a sender unit right there, and that's actually the entire sender unit. This just is a cap that goes on here, and so if this thing decided to leak, it wouldn't drip necessarily directly on top of the motor, and the majority of the fuel would be directed elsewhere. So that's all that's for. This is an unmolested GPZ, so it has this air valve up in front here. Kind of see it right there. See if I can get you in there better. Let's see. Can you see that? There's an air valve right in there. Yeah, now you can see it. And what that does is some sort of exhaust gas recirculation type deal under certain vacuum conditions. I really don't know, to be honest with you. But it's just part of the emissions that it had at that particular time. And most of these inline fours from back in that period have those, and a lot of people just delete it, do a factory delete. This is, again, unmolested. So the reason why I'm mentioning it is you have a T in the vacuum line here, right about there. Whenever you have more than one vacuum line, in other words, it doesn't go just from point A to point B, you have a potential for a vacuum leak, and that certainly could cause the symptoms we had, but that's not the case. These vacuum lines look fine. I'm going to replace them anyway, because I have some in stock, some really good Honda fuel line, which works pretty good, actually excellent for these vacuum lines. So there's no problem with this. And where it goes is it goes from this carburetor, number 4, up to it's really more of an elbow, and then over to that valve, and then number 2 looks like goes up to the fuel cock. Yeah, and there's another one. No, that's how that works. Now sometimes they're joined together, and I don't remember. I'm sure I set this up as what the service manual said, because I always do that, but I'll double check that to make sure. A lot of times they are bridged, so you have like 4 and 2 or 1 and 3 or something that's 1 and 3 are that's pulsating the vacuum impulse, and it goes to 2 different places, or just to the vacuum fuel cock. It doesn't matter. But the point is, the best thing to do is to make sure that they're set up as the factory engineers intended, and I'm pretty sure that's the case on this, because again, I don't do it differently unless there's a damn good reason for it, and so I'll verify that. But these vacuum lines are not suspect at this time. At a later time, I'll check that little vacuum or that little vacuum actuator dealio switch up there, air, that valve, that vacuum actuated valve up there. Pull a vacuum on it, make sure it's holding, because the valve itself could be a vacuum leak, as could the actual fuel cock be a vacuum leak source, because it's going to pull a finite vacuum on that, and it should essentially pull no more. So if there's a vacuum leak in either one of those, that could be symptomatic of what we're dealing with right now. But I really suspect not, because again, we look at all the evidence, and the rest of the evidence is pointing toward fuel, because the fuel's bad. So again, we have to pull the carbs anyway, because he wants them rejetted, so we'll go ahead and do that now. All right, here's the service manual procedure for removing the carbs. Loosen the band clamps on all 4 carbs and take any vacuum lines off, as we've already done, fuel lines, that sort of thing. They talk about overflow hoses, removing them from the air box. I don't know what they mean by that, except, these are the only thing connected to the air box. Now, I know for a fact when you try to take these GPz ones off, these things are, I wouldn't say fragile, but they're not glued in like the Honda ones and other Kawasaki ones. These will come out pretty easily. It's essentially just a big grommet in here. And so that's what I do. I just pop these things out individually and make sure you label them so you know where they go. But that's what I'm going to do to get the clearance to go backwards. The service manual says that they have to come out to the right, so that's what we'll do. That's fine. Once we loosen the band clamps, and we'll dislodge them from the carb holders. These carb holders are new. I looked in the service ticket from 2020. And I did replace all 4 of these carb holders at that time, which is usually what I do. So that makes a lot of sense. So we'll just pop these out here, and we'll get them out of the way. Now, if you have really stiff ones, like these are in bad shape, this ain't going to work for you. They'll crack. These are just in really good shape, and they were 2 years ago as well. And that's how I did it then, and that's how I put them back in. Again, there's no evidence of any glue or anything on these things being held in place. They're just held in by this grommet. Probably a feature of engineering, because otherwise how are you going to get them out? I mean, those things will hold on like a long lost relative. So I'll go ahead and take them, the rest of them off camera, and then we'll pull the carbs out of this thing. Another thing I think you can do with these is actually just push them right into the air box and get the clearance like this. Just push them right through, just carefully past the grommet edge, and then they'll give you enough clearance to move the carburetors out too, and then you just have to kind of reverse the process. So I think I did this last time. I don't exactly remember, but there you go. See, they'll just drop inside there and give you plenty of room. See this? I don't like this paint on these carbs either. This black paint on these GPz carbs always comes off over the years. So yeah, I'll do it this way as well, but I can't exactly remember how I put them back in when I had it originally, but I remember it wasn't that hard. It's virtually impossible to do with these air intake funnels in place, all 4 of them, and try to get the carbs in, pressed up against those, okay, even at an angle or something, and get them in and seat them and then push them in. I could not figure out a way to do that, and I've done a lot of these carbs. So the way I did it was I installed them back into the carb holders and then put each one of these in individually. I think maybe I did reach in through the air box for the middle ones to push them through and then just get them seated. They're not, they're not that hard to do, and this air box funnel up here is actually pretty big. We're going to be changing an air filter out, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. But, being in the way inside there as we push these in, but it's not a big deal. So we did 2 one way and 2 the other. It works either way. Again, if these things are petrified, you're going to have to replace them anyway, so don't even try screwing around with them. If they crack, they crack. Put new ones in. I don't know if they're available OEM, but I'm almost positive they're available aftermarket. Like Z1 Enterprises or one of those places like that, I'm pretty sure have them. All 4 band clamps are loose. I like to put a little bit of silicone spray between the carb holder and the carburetors. And I think what it does is when you start moving them, because we're going to start wiggling them up and down somewhat forcefully sometimes, it'll immediately start to capillary in there and just kind of wiggle itself in there as well. And that'll help these things come out. Likewise, on the way back in, I use the silicone grease. So like that super lube stuff that I got, you've probably seen it a number of times. And then, well, these are not tight at all. What in the hell? Okay, it's just the way they are. Some are loose, some are tight. Okay, so service manual says come out to the right. I got a towel down there just in case. I don't want to bang it against the engine case and scratch it up. So that's that. That's there. All right, here they come. Now, Throttle on this one. This is actually, I love the way they did it on this in these GPZs. It's really just one cable. It's not a push-pull type, and all you gotta do is lift up on it and pull it out the slot, and then drop it down so it angles where you can pull it out the slot down below where it goes into that little barrel connector down there, and then your cable comes right out. I mean, these are just super easy when it comes to that. So yeah, all the adjustment is going to be up here on the throttle side, so there's no adjustment down here as far as cable tension goes. And we'll carefully wiggle these things out. One set of carburetors. Okay folks, the carbs obviously are out. They're drained and upside down. Going to disassemble the float bowls at least. Let me show you what came out. Yuck. Real varnishy. Now, realistically speaking, we could have probably just drained these, put some fresh fuel in it, and fired it up, and I bet it probably run pretty good because it's the bad fuel that's doing it. But remember, customer wants me to put a jet kit in it with the K&N filter. What I forgot to mention before also was this has got a 4-in-1 now, and when I had it from the previous customer 2 years ago, it had the original exhaust system on it. So when I said unmolested, I meant the carburetors. It is slightly molested, all right? So we got the higher flow exhaust on it, whatever it is. I'm not sure what brand it is. And he wants just that stage 1 with a higher flowing air filter, so we're going to need to jet it up a little bit, and that's that pizza box right there. So I just wanted to clarify that. And so let's get to it. So let me dump this gas before it goes somewhere. Yuck. Or at least get it out of the way. I'm going to throw it in a container. Pretty nasty stuff. So like I said, in reality's sake, all you really need to do probably is put new fuel in it. And I bet you she'd fire right up. There's not going to be a whole lot of disassembly on this one. We're just going to take it out, take the float bowls off, take a look. Normally I have a better setup for this. I have to do it on the lift, but the burnt bronze bimbo is over there still on the other lift. That's what I'm going to call this bike now. The burnt bronze bimbo, since that's the color on it. And, oh, I should probably show you real quick. I'll just trip over myself here. Take a look at this. Look at this. Yeah, I got the back end nice and clean, swing arm nice and clean, polished up somewhat. Look at that disc. That is a OEM disc that I sent up to True Disc LLC. I got it off eBay because the other one was completely trashed. And, you know, he did a great job on it. That's $55 for that plus shipping to have him resurface that. True Disc LLC. His name is Tom. Great name, by the way, and so look them up. But I just have this part of the subframe hanging here right now that isn't bolted up. But you can see I painted the fender with my special paint that I use for it. That's a secret. The subframe is, not really. Subframe is painted, so everything's kind of bolted on loosely right now. You know, hanging on loosely, but it won't let go. And we'll get to it when we can get to it because we got other things to deal with like this. So let's get back to it. Stop screwing around. As far as the VFR goes, I don't know when I'm going to get to the rest of it. You know, I was out of state for a week, which is a video coming on that too as soon as I can get some time to put it together. Unfortunately, I do not have any riding video because I don't have a functioning or working GoPro. I'm trying to get some from a guy that was riding with us one day. He did have one, but unfortunately he doesn't respond to my messages. Maybe he doesn't like me, I don't know. Seemed like a nice guy though, and I'm a nice guy, so you'd think that that would be the case. Now let me show you something about these carbs. On some carbs, the float bowls are all the same. And you know, you can put them wherever you want. On these you can't, and how you tell is these drains. The drains have to be facing outwards where you can actually get at them with a screwdriver when they're mounted on the bike. So you see 2 of them point that way and 2 of them point that way. These marks here were already there. I remember those from the last time I did it, so we'll just verify that those are right. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 1 and 2 point that way, and 3 and 4 point that way. So they may not go on, you know, opposite ways. I mean, they'll go from different spots. They won't flip around. I mean, you could put this one over here, but that would be facing inboard, and that wouldn't be right. So you'd be able to tell from that. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. Some you can just put on whichever way you want because the drains all face in the same direction. All right, the one thing I like about these old Kawasaki's is they don't use an O-ring gasket. They use one of these, you know, composite like paper ones, and this is perfectly fine. It's only 2 years old. I replaced these. So, yeah, we won't have to worry about maybe any replacement parts, hopefully. Let's take a look at the inside of number 1. I'm not going to show you each one because probably not necessary. Yeah, we got some goo sitting right there on the end of that. You saw it flake off. So there's some crud most likely. Oh yeah, hang on. That's pretty nasty. So slow jets are all plugged. That's why the thing won't run for shit with the enricher off. There's your enricher pickup right there. So that's not so good either. So that's all plugged up. So we're just going to have to tear these down but leave the rack intact. And, we'll just clean them all out and get them replaced with the jets. So I'm going to take a look at the OEM size jets versus the jet kit. It won't be on this video because I'm going to probably do this in a couple parts, but I just want to do a comparo and see what they are. A lot of times the pilot jets or the slow jets are the exact same size and they only change the mains. Sometimes they're like 1.5 step up. Makini does their jetting differently than like Keihin. When you get like a 37.5, let's say, I don't know what these are, but let's say it's a 37.5 pilot jet, they go off of flow through a particular size orifice. I don't know how they measure that, but they have some way to do it, and that's how they number their jets. Keihin jets, on the other hand, are measured by actual size of the orifice. So, for example, a 37.5 Makini might only be like a 17 Keihin or something like that for a slow jet. So it's something you got to keep in mind. It's kind of easy to get confused by that, but as long as you know, you know. So yeah, my ultrasonic took a shit, and I'm not going to put this whole thing in a bigger tub of anything. We're just going to use carb cleaner, compressed air. We'll get these cleaned out, like I said before, and they'll be fine. All right, so I'm going to pop the float bowls off the other 3, and we'll take a look real quick. Number 2, the same. Well, actually worse. Look at that. But number 3, take a look at that. It really should look like that. And number 4 the same way. So that would explain why I wanted to try running, because maybe 3 and 4 were passing some fuel, but certainly 1 and 2 weren't. And, it happens. There's a little junk around there I mentioned before. You see a little speck or something here? Just junk. That's bad fuel. There's an inline fuel filter here that I put in the last time I worked on it. And so I doubt that got any crud through that. This is just bad fuel. Okay, I wanted to make a couple of final points on carb stuff for this video. The first point is, when you're going to look up your service data, especially for float height, and float height is really, really critical, and I'll explain why here in a minute. You definitely want to look in your service manual and make sure that there's no supplement that applies to the bike that you have, which in this case, it does. The manual for this is a GPz750 base manual, and it kind of gives you the overall of how to take it apart because it's the same basic motor as a GPz750. However, this is a ZX750, I think an A2 if I'm not mistaken. And so you have to look in the back of the manual and you have to get the service data for that. That'll tell you the proper float height, the jet sizes, things like that. Now the float height on these is really critical. Now, Kawasaki will tell you to do it 2 ways. First, they will give you a measurement of a float height. And I'm pretty sure on the ZX750, you actually measure the float height in the position it's in right here. I'll have to confirm that, but I seem to remember that. Instead of doing it this way, oh, there's some gas in there, damn it! And where it just touches, and bounces off, you see on number 2 there? I'll get you in a little better. Where it just touches and then you measure the float height. I am almost certain that this one actually tells you to do it with the carbs, with the weight of the floats down on them. I've mentioned this in other videos, and sometimes that's the case. All right, now I'll confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that is the situation with these. So in regards to the float level that I just mentioned, that's the second point here. Kawasaki often will give you a service fuel level spec as well as a measured fuel float height spec. So the measured one gets you in the ballpark. And the way to properly do this, because the float level is really critical, as I said, is to do a service fuel level. And I've kind of explained this a little bit. I don't remember if I've actually done it in a video. I'll try to do that in a video like this one. But what you end up doing with a service fuel level is you have them all back together upright, and you apply fuel to them. And then you take, on the bottom of the float bowl here, you have a drain, as you saw me operate earlier. You put a little hose on it, a clear hose, sticking up the side. open that drain. What I usually do is drop it down to clear any air bubbles, bring it up, and it will, this is the laws of fluid dynamics, it will assume the same height as the fuel in the carburetor. And then you measure that from a reference on the side of the fuel body. I think it's the point where the fuel body meets the float, the float bowl, yeah. And it's like a 1 millimeter or something like that, whatever it is. And they all need to be about the same. Yeah, that looks pretty junky, huh? They all need to be about the same, whatever that spec is, and I just don't remember off the top of my head. So the reason why the float levels are so critical in these is because if you have a varying amount of float level, let's say one's low, one's high, or two are low, one's high, or they're all significantly different. What that does is that brings the fuel in relationship to the main and the slow jet to a disproportionate level between the carbs. Now, if you have, between the cylinders rather. Now, assuming you have the same general intake pulse at a given RPM, that's affecting these carbs to provide that Venturi effect to draw the air through, it will be more difficult to draw the appropriate air-fuel mix in a carburetor that the float level is too low because the fuel is further away from the actual body of the carb, the throat of the carb. And likewise, if it's too high, that cylinder may actually be a little richer, might have a little bit more fuel as compared to the other ones. Now, I'm going to link to a video in the description. I forgot the creator's name. I think he's given one of the best descriptions as to why float level is so important. And he did it when he put a lawnmower carburetor on a Ford 302 in an old Maverick that he souped up. And the thing ran great. And he explains the reason why it can work, because he adjusted the fuel level higher, and he explains why. And I think he gives one of the best descriptions as to why fuel and float level is so critical in virtually any carbureted engine. And again, I'll link to that in the description. I encourage you to watch his video. He's very, very talented, very competent young man as far as this stuff goes. And so, yeah, the float level is critical. Kawasaki, I think, realizes that. So what they do is they give you, again, the measured float level, and then you do a service fuel level on it, which I remember doing on these, and I had it right. So I'm certainly going to do it again. The other thing, the third point is, as I've shown you in other videos, and I have a video actually on this, this rack will get pressure tested in this position. I don't even need the float bowls on here for that. In this position, I'll put air pressure with my homemade tester on the fuel inlet. Once we get it all cleaned up, put back together, and we'll verify that there's no leaks in this these fuel tees or this fuel connector. Here's your main one right here where the fuel inlet goes in. I think I pointed over here, I'm sorry. This is the fuel inlet side. And so you have this T, and then you have a connector here between 1 and 2 and a connector here between 3 and 4. The O-rings often go bad in those, and hopefully that's not the case in this one, but it shouldn't be because it wasn't leaking externally. So we'll just do a pressure test to verify all that and verify that the float valves, the needles, are seating properly. These are metal ones that go into the brass seats. I do remember that. And so we'll make sure those are all clean and that it functions properly. So I just want to bring up those 3 points about carburetors. And, to re-emphasize that setting these up, especially on these older Japanese inline fours, is really, really critical for them to run right. You got to have everything spot on. Everything's got to be clean as a surgical suite before a surgeon does like brain surgery, all right? They got to be clean, and they got to be set properly, and then they'll work great. Assuming everything else in the engine is good, you have good compression, ergo you have a good intake charge at a given RPM intake pulse rather, then it'll work great. So that's what I wanted to cover basically on the carbs before I button this video up. Part of my outro here, I'm going to show you what we're going to be doing in another upcoming video. I mentioned this on the community from when I was up in Georgia. I put a little post up in the YouTube community. This is my blown fork seal diaper. That's got a bunch of fork oil and dirt on it. The seal on the right front fork blew. First day I was up there. This is what we did to prevent the oil from getting down onto the rotor and the brake pads and the caliper. And so luckily we noticed. I didn't even notice it. One of my riding buddies did when we stopped. He goes, "Hey, your fork is leaking." I go, "No way." And sure as hell, because I inspected this before I left on this trip. So got up in the mountains and got a little spirited doing trail braking, and the next thing you know, I blew a seal. The other side's fine, but I do have the parts in. And just while I was doing this video, I got a box from Traxion Dynamics, which is likewise up in Georgia, where I was. I don't know where they're at in relationship to where I was. I was up in Helen. This is a special tool. Now, I know it's hard to imagine that I actually don't have the tool to do these upright forks, but I didn't. You need a special spring compressor. And we'll show you that in the video that we do on this one, which is going to be coming up whenever I can get that out of here and do some other stuff. And we're going to do some modifications to it as well to make it even more better. All right, so stand by for that. All right, guys, so that's it. Hope you got something out of it. Hope you learned something. So, we'll probably just have 2 videos on this. It's a pretty simple job. I mean, we're not dealing with anything in depth here. We've got just some carb cleaning to do. And I just really wanted to overemphasize, and I beat it to death, really. I do on all videos. It's really critical to make sure that your carbs are spotless and they are spot on as far as their engineered settings. Otherwise, it's just not going to run right. It's just the way it is. Jetting, float level, the whole bit. All right. So again, if you like what you saw, don't hesitate to subscribe, ring the bell, and like the video. You get notified when I put up more content like this, or when I deal with the inverted or upright forks, right side up, upside down forks, whatever they're called in the concourse job, or anything else that comes in between that. So until we meet on the next video, I just wanted to say, of course, don't just repair, restore. Thanks for watching.